A routine traffic stop in Montgomery spirals into chaos, all because the driver is Jasmine Crockett, a black civil rights attorney. Within minutes, she's pulled from her luxury car, her belongings scattered, and a bag of heroin mysteriously appears. Lieutenant Charles Reddington thinks no one will challenge his story, but rookie cop Alex Reyes, he sees everything. And what he does next cost him everything. Because when the system turns on its own, who will choose silence and who will risk it all? For the truth, stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Montgomery, Alabama. Morning sun cut through thick southern air, casting gold across quiet streets that felt too still, like the calm before something breaks. A slow jazz tune spilled from a corner cafe, soft, against the tension humming beneath. In a marked cruiser, Lieutenant Charles Reddington gripped the wheel, like it was the last thing he trusted. His eyes, sharp and tired, scanned the sidewalks with quiet disdain. 4 decades on the force had hardened him into a man who saw suspicion before facts, threat before truth. Next to him, rookie Alex Reyes sat straight, but uneasy. First month on the job, badge still shining, heart still full of purpose. He'd imagined learning from a legend. But Charles, he wasn't here to teach, only to patrol and to pass judgment. The silence between them said more than words. One man clung to a broken system. The other was just beginning to see the cracks. The cruiser rolled deeper into the heart of old Montgomery. Neatly trimmed hedges framed red brick houses, each guarded by iron gates, and American flags that didn't feel so welcoming when you looked close. Everything in this neighborhood screamed legacy, old money, old rules, old blood. Charles Reddington's eyes flicked between each driveway like he was hunting ghosts. From a war only he remembered. Then he saw it. A black Maserati Gran Turismo. Sleek, polished, too bold for a place that prided itself on being subtle. It didn't roar. It purred, like it belonged. That alone however seemed to offend him. He braked hard, leaned forward, squinted, and then he saw her. Jasmine Crockett. A black woman, early 40s, she wore a crisp white blazer over a tailored blouse. Her heels clicked against the pavement, precise, unhurried, her afro perfectly shaped. Her movements, efficient, poised, no flash, no theatrics, just a quiet, undeniable command of presence. Charles's mouth twisted before he even spoke. A Maserati in this zip code? He muttered, driving like she's running for mayor or something. His tone turned from curious to accusatory. People like that don't belong around here. He didn't say the word, but Alex, he didn't need to hear it. It was soaked into every syllable. That, her skin, her success, her audacity to show up with nothing but calm and confidence. Alex's stomach tightened. Sir, she hasn't done anything, he said carefully, eyes flicking to the speedometer, to the dash cam. No red flags, no cause, just a woman pulling into a driveway. But Charles, he wasn't looking for violations. He was looking for confirmation. You think I'm just guessing? Charles barked. They roll in like they're above the rules, flash their money, act like they're safe, just 'cause they dress nice. Trust me, Reyes, there's always something underneath. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Charles's hand moved, with practiced force, flipping on the siren like he'd done it 1,000 times. But this time, it wasn't for a crime. The flashing lights pierced the calm morning like warning shots, casting red and blue across Jasmine Crockett's rear windshield. Her Maserati had barely rolled to a complete stop before Charles hit the gas and cut her off at the curb, boxing her in like a fleeing suspect. Inside the patrol car, Alex's pulse spiked. He looked down at the dashboard. No alerts, no violations flagged. Sir, he said again, carefully choosing each word, we don't have a cause to stop her. His voice carried tension, not defiance. Yet Charles bristled like he'd just been challenged. "She's not from around here," he snapped. "People like that don't drive into this neighborhood just for coffee." His tone wasn't just suspicious, it was final, like a man who'd already written the ending before the story even began. Alex pressed again, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "I understand that, but what's the offense?" he asked, still keeping his tone professional. "She wasn't speeding. She didn't blow a stop. Plates are clean. Nothing on the scanner." Charles laughed, but there was no humor, just a bitter edge. "Reyes, let me explain something," he said, leaning forward, eyes locked on the car ahead like a sniper. "Sighting in. There's what the law says, and then there's what experience tells you. I've been doing this since before you knew how to tie your boots, and my gut, it doesn't lie." He jabbed a finger toward Jasmine's car. "That confidence, that car, that attitude, it all screams cover. Dress nice, act cool, look harmless. But I've seen the truth behind those eyes before. Don't let the outfit fool you." Alex sat back, tension running up his spine. The sirens still pulsed, lighting up the polished metal of Jasmine's car, like a stage. She hadn't moved, hands on the wheel, eyes forward, posture calm. But there was something heartbreaking in the stillness. Not fear, familiarity, like she knew exactly how easily this could go wrong. Alex felt a pit open in his stomach. This wasn't policing, it was profiling, dressed up as instinct. "We're really doing this?" he asked under his breath, barely audible. Charles didn't respond. He was already reaching for the door, already stepping into the role of judge, jury, and something darker. And as he slammed the cruiser door shut, the line between justice and prejudice snapped, clean, brutal, irreversible. Jasmine didn't hesitate as the patrol lights flashed in her rearview mirror, painting the inside of her car in anxious shades of red and blue. She moved with practiced calm, no sudden gestures. Hands visible, voice steady. She rolled the window down halfway, just enough to speak and pass documents through. "Good morning, officer," she said, polite but firm. "Can I ask why I'm being stopped?" Her movements were slow, intentional. Right hand to the glove box, left still gripping the wheel. She pulled out her license, registration, insurance card, stacked neatly, and held them out without breaking eye contact. She knew exactly what to do. Not because she was guilty, but because she was experienced. Charles ignored the question, took the documents, without a word, glancing at them quickly, like they were already suspect. "Where you headed?" he asked, tone flat, eyes sharp. "I have a meeting with a client," Jasmine said. "A legal consult on Highland Avenue." Charles stared at her. He wasn't reading the information. He was watching her, sizing her up, not for a crime, but for a story he'd already decided on. "Nice car," he said finally. "That yours?" "Yes," she replied. "Paid in full." Charles raised his eyebrows. "Well, you must be doing all right for yourself. That law firm must be printing money, huh?" Jasmine kept her face neutral. "I run my own practice." He smirked. "Right. Or maybe you've got someone taking care of things behind the scenes? Husband? Boyfriend? Sugar daddy?" Still no reaction, just calm, unwavering composure. "I built my career, no one else." From the cruiser, Alex listened through the open window. His shoulders tensed. The tone wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. Charles flipped the license over. "Civil rights lawyer. That explains the attitude." Then louder. "So you're the type that loves to sue cops, huh? Looking for your next payday?" Jasmine's voice was calm, but there was an edge now. "I represent people whose rights have been violated. That includes unlawful stops like this one." Charles leaned closer, one arm on the doorframe. He lowered his voice. "You know," he said, "I've stopped a lot of people like you. All of them had the same look, too confident, too polished, like they thought the rules didn't apply. I follow the law, Jasmine replied, and I expect it to be followed in return. Charles scoffed. You know how many times I've heard that? You dress it up with fancy words, fancy clothes, and think it makes you untouchable. I don't think I'm untouchable, she said. I think I have the same rights as anyone else. He shook his head. You don't see many of people like you in this neighborhood, not unless they're cleaning the houses or visiting someone they're not supposed to. Alex clenched his jaw. That wasn't even coded language anymore. It was direct, ugly. Charles looked back at the documents. You sure this registration's real? It is, Jasmine answered. You're welcome to verify it. He looked up again, smirk returning. Tell me the truth. You ever get this far without someone holding the door open for you? Jasmine didn't flinch. Every door I've walked through, I opened myself. He paused for a beat, sizing her up once more. But this time, she didn't give him space to speak. Officer, I've answered your questions. Done everything. By the book. Unless I'm being detained, I'd like to continue to my meeting. He didn't move, just stood there, eyes fixed on her, like he was waiting for her to slip, waiting for her to raise her voice, break posture, give him the excuse he needed. But Jasmine didn't break. She didn't even blink. Smart mouth, he muttered. You all talk the same when you get caught. I haven't been caught doing anything, she replied, and you know that. Charles leaned away from the window, shaking his head. We'll see. From the car, Alex was still frozen. He watched Jasmine do everything right and still be treated like she'd done something wrong, not because of what she did, but because of who she was and how she carried herself. And Charles? He wasn't looking for answers. He was looking for control. The tension didn't break. It thickened. Charles stood still for a moment, eyes locked on Jasmine, like she just dared him to cross a line he thought belonged to him. She had answered his questions, given him her documents, made no sudden moves. And yet, to a man like Charles Reddington, calm wasn't compliance. It was challenge, and challenge had to be put down. Without warning, he moved toward the back of her car, boots crunching against the pavement, with purpose. Go ahead and pop the trunk, he said over his shoulder. Casual, like he was asking for directions. But his tone? It wasn't casual. It was tight, controlled, dangerous. Jasmine didn't even turn her head. Her voice came through the window, calm and crisp. I'm sorry, officer. What's your reason for that request? Charles didn't look at her. Just routine, he said, already reaching for the trunk latch like her answer. Didn't matter. Nothing to worry about, unless you've got something to hide. Jasmine's expression didn't change, but inside, her instincts lit up like a flare. This was where it always shifted, where the situation went from questionable to unconstitutional. She reached for nothing. She raised no voice, but her words cut sharper than volume ever could. With respect, officer, you don't have a legal right to search my vehicle. I've complied with your stop. There's no probable cause, no consent, no warrant. Charles finally turned, one eyebrow raised like he'd been personally insulted. You quoting the Fourth Amendment now? Yes, she said, I am. I know my rights, and this isn't a lawful search. He let out a dry laugh, short, bitter. Lady, I've been doing this job for 30 years. Don't tell me about my job. I'm not telling you how to do your job, Jasmine replied. I'm reminding you of the law. There's a difference. That landed harder than she expected. His jaw shifted, like he was grinding down whatever filter he had left. The smirk on his face turned into something uglier, more rigid. You think you're smarter than me? He asked quietly. I don't think that matters, she said. I think the law is the same for both of us. The words struck like a match in gasoline. Charles stepped back toward her door, his hand hovering near his belt. Not his gun, not yet, but close enough that the intent was impossible to miss. His mouth tightened. You know what this looks like to me? You being difficult, refusing a simple request. Makes people wonder what you're hiding. Jasmine didn't blink. I'm not hiding anything. I'm protecting my rights. The silence that followed was suffocating, not empty, heavy, charged, with the weight of decades, of stereotypes, of stories that ended in sirens and cell phone footage. She'd been here before, not with this man, not in this exact place, but in this moment, the moment where dignity gets mistaken for defiance, where calm gets read as arrogance, where knowing the law becomes the thing that makes you look like a threat. From the cruiser, Alex sat frozen. Watching the exchange unfold like a car accident, he couldn't stop. He'd heard this tone in training. De-escalation, they'd called it. But what he was seeing now wasn't de-escalation. It was something else. Something colder, more calculated. Charles didn't want the truth. He wanted control. And Jasmine, she was denying him that. She stayed seated, hands visible. Voice clear. If you have a warrant, I'll open the trunk. If not, I will not consent to a search. The air snapped, tight, electric, like something invisible had just been broken. Charles's patience, already razor-thin, finally tore. He stepped back from Jasmine's window and barked over his shoulder. "Reyes, get out here!" His voice was sharp, commanding, leaving no room for hesitation. Alex hesitated anyway. One hand hovered near the door handle. The other clenched into a fist against his thigh. He knew what was coming, and every instinct screamed not to be a part of it. Still, duty or fear won. He opened the cruiser door, boots hitting the pavement harder than they needed to. Charles was already on Jasmine's side of the vehicle. "Step out of the car." Jasmine didn't move, her voice still calm. "Am I under arrest?" "Step outside of the car," Charles repeated, his hand gripping the door handle. Alex flinched. Jasmine looked up at him, then slowly unbuckled her seatbelt. Every movement was calculated, measured, practiced, deliberate. She opened the door herself and stepped out, standing tall despite the heat closing in around her. She didn't look defiant. She looked unshakable. Charles gave her no time. "Hands where I can see them." He grabbed her arm, without warning, pulled her a step to the side. Jasmine nearly stumbled on the curb, but caught herself, heels scraping asphalt. Alex watched, frozen, between instinct and protocol. This wasn't an arrest. It wasn't even a search, with cause. It was a show of force. One meant to humiliate, not to enforce. "Reyes, her bag, check it." Alex froze. "Sir, Now!" Charles snapped. With hesitation thick in his every motion, Alex picked up Jasmine's leather handbag from the driver's seat. "You don't have permission to search that," Jasmine said firmly. Eyes locked on him. "That bag is private property." Charles didn't wait. He snatched it from Alex's hands, unclipped it, roughly, turned it over. The contents spilled out, in a cascade. Keys, a phone, lipstick, a leather-bound notebook, a family photo, in a plastic sleeve. Everything hit the concrete like it didn't matter. Jasmine inhaled sharply, and for the first time, her composure flickered. Not from fear, but from fury she refused to show. Charles bent down, poking through her things with his boot. "Let's see what our fancy lawyer's hiding." Across the street, a screen door creaked open. A woman stepped onto her porch, phone in hand. Another voice called from behind a parked car. "Yo, what's going on?" Someone else was already filming, camera held just above a steering wheel inside a nearby sedan. One by one, heads turned, drawn by flashing lights and the sharp tension bleeding into the street. A man in basketball shorts walked his dog 2 houses down and stopped mid-step, raised his phone, without saying a word. Jasmine stood still, amid it all, breathing slow and steady, refusing to bend or break. Her things lay scattered like pieces of her identity on the pavement, and not one of them had given Charles what he wanted. But that hadn't been the point. The point was to put her in her place, to say, "Your dignity doesn't matter here." She looked down at her photo on the sidewalk, her and her mother, framed by courtroom steps. She blinked once, then returned her gaze hard to Charles. "This is harassment," she said quietly, but loud enough for the cameras. Charles found nothing. He stood in silence for a few seconds too long, hunched over the curb, staring at the last of Jasmine's belongings laid out before him. Her key had stopped rattling. Her phone screen gone dark. Small frame photo, a smiling black woman in a cap and gown, fluttered under the breeze, lifted at the corner, settled again near the gutter. And still, nothing. No threat, no contraband, no excuse. Just a woman who had followed every law, every command, every step of the playbook, only to end up publicly stripped of her dignity. Charles straightened his back, slowly, jaw clenched, scanning the crowd, now doubled in size. A woman, from a porch, held up her phone. A man across the street leaned against his truck, arms folded, camera rolling. From a second-floor window, someone was already live streaming. Charles saw them all. But in his eyes, this was no longer about the law. It was about control, about proving a point, about not walking away from the stop empty-handed. His fingers moved almost casually. He reached into the inner lining of his vest. Quick, smooth, without hesitation. Alex noticed it immediately. From a few feet away, the motion looked insignificant, like brushing lint off a uniform. But to Alex, it was unmistakable. That was not part of protocol. His breath hitched, eyes narrowing. Then he saw it. A small clear plastic bag, pinched tight between Charles's thumb and index finger. Inside it, white powder. Not a lot, just enough to ruin someone's life. Alex's stomach flipped. Cold dread coiled in his gut. He knew that bag. Everyone at the precinct did. It was part of a seizure, logged into evidence 2 weeks ago, then quietly marked misplaced. He'd asked about it, been brushed off, told not to worry. Now here it was, pulled from a pocket like a magician's trick, ready to complete a lie. Charles crouched low beside the Maserati. He didn't speak, didn't even look around. He simply leaned in, lifted the driver's seat with one hand, and with the other, slid the bag beneath it, fast, smooth, practiced, like he'd done it before. Like this was routine. Alex felt the air go thin. Every sound around him, the hum of a nearby AC unit, the buzz of street chatter, the faint bark of a dog, faded. All he could hear was his own heartbeat. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only watch. As Charles stood upright, lifted the bag into the air, like a dirty little trophy, and said the words that turned truth into fiction. "Well, looks like we've got ourselves a little problem after all." Gas rippled through the crowd, phones tilted forward. Eyes unwidened. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She didn't even turn her head. She looked at the bag, then slowly turned to Alex and locked eyes. Her expression unreadable, but her eyes sharp, not angry, not scared, certain, like she'd seen this exact moment before, like she knew exactly what had just happened, and more importantly, that Alex knew too. The pause between them lasted seconds, but felt eternal. Then she stepped forward, just one step, enough to close the space between her voice and his ears. "Your silence will become evidence against you." Alex's breath caught. The words slid under his skin like a blade, not because she was wrong, but because she was right. He looked down at the bag in Charles's hand, then at Jasmine's scattered belongings, still untouched, then back at Charles, shoulders square, badge flashing in the sun, lying with the full weight of his uniform behind him. Every part of Alex wanted to look away, but Jasmine wouldn't let him. She kept her eyes locked on his, like a silent plea. No tears, no panic, just truth. Raw and absolute laid bare between them. And now, it wasn't just about what Charles had done. It was about what Alex would do next. The silence shattered like glass. Charles held the bag high, his voice slicing through the air. We've got narcotics. She had this stashed under the seat. Gasps broke out from the crowd. Conversations erupted in low, urgent waves. Several phones angled higher. A car alarm, down the street, blared for half a second before someone silenced it. Just long enough to spike the tension higher. Across the pavement, Jasmine's name was already being whispered. Is that the woman from the news? She didn't look like a user. You sure he didn't just... But Charles didn't care. He was too busy, feeding the story. He paced in front of the car, like a prosecutor on a stage, holding the bag up, like evidence in a courtroom. This right here is why we watch these streets. Doesn't matter how you dress, doesn't matter what kind of car you drive. The law doesn't care about appearances. But someone did. Jasmine still hadn't moved, still hadn't spoken. Her things still scattered across the concrete, her dignity hanging in the air, like smoke. But then, quietly, calmly, she reached into the inside pocket of her blazer. Charles noticed. He stiffened, hand grazing his holster. Don't, he started. But Jasmine wasn't reaching for a weapon. She pulled out a leather badge holder, black, clean, with the calm precision of someone who had done this before. She flipped it open with a single motion. Sharp, practiced, final. The golden seal caught the sunlight, the lettering unmistakable. The silence that followed hit harder than the sirens. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. My name is Jasmine Crockett. Gaze locked on Charles. Voice clear, cutting. Senior Civil Rights Investigator, Office of the Attorney General, Washington, D.C. You are now the subject of a federal misconduct review. Charles blinked. Once, then again. The color drained from his face faster than his bravado. For the first time in 20 minutes, he looked like a man who didn't know what to say. His hand dropped away from his belt. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes darted from the badge to her face to the crowd. And for the first time, he saw what they saw. Not a suspect, a superior. Behind him, Alex stood frozen. The ground beneath him felt like it had just split wide open. His training didn't cover this. There was no page in the handbook for what to do. When the person your partner just tried to frame pulls federal credentials, he didn't even breathe. He just stared at Jasmine, at Charles, at the camera phones, now filming every twitch of his face. And Jasmine, she didn't look angry. She didn't look triumphant. She looked like someone who had been here before. And this time, she brought the entire system with her. The silence after Jasmine's revelation was deafening. Charles didn't move. His eyes locked on the badge like it was something radioactive. He'd built his entire authority on fear, on unchecked power, and now it stood hollow in front of her calm, golden seal. Behind him, murmurs rose from the crowd, but Jasmine's focus didn't shift. She turned slowly, deliberately, until her eyes landed on Alex. He stood stiff as a statue, face pale, sweat clinging to the back of his neck beneath the collar of his uniform. She didn't yell. She didn't plead. She simply asked. Officer Reyes, she said, her voice steady and low enough to cut through the noise. You saw what happened. Tell the truth. Alex's chest tightened. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. His thoughts, a war zone, images of the plastic bag, Charles's sleight of hand, Jasmine's quiet resistance, the phone cameras, all pointed at him like loaded weapons. Every fiber of his training clashed with the voice of his conscience. His mind flashed back to every lesson drilled into him in the academy. Protect and serve. Integrity matters. Do what's right when it's hardest. It had always sounded noble in a lecture hall. But now, standing on a street surrounded by strangers and betrayal, it felt like a threat. He looked at Jasmine. She wasn't begging. She wasn't afraid. She was just standing there, dignified even in the mess Charles had created around her. Her eyes didn't waver. Then he looked at Charles, his partner, his mentor, his mistake, I, Alex began, his voice barely a whisper. He cleared his throat, forced air into his lungs. I saw it. He blinked, his voice rising. I saw him take the bag out of his vest, his heart hammering now. It wasn't in the car. He planted it. I watched him do it. Time stopped. For one split second, everything was still. Jasmine didn't move. Charles didn't breathe. The crowd held their breath. And then it hit. Shouts erupted like a tidal wave. You heard that? It's on video. That man just admitted it. He set her up. I got it on camera, bro, every second. Dozens of phones, now locked on Charles, on Alex, on Jasmine. The world was no longer guessing. It was watching. Charles turned, face twisted, teeth clenched in rage. His voice came out as a roar, not words. Liar, he pointed at Alex, like he could burn the truth off his tongue. You don't know what you're saying. You're a rookie. You're not even cleared for independent patrol. Alex took a step back. His legs trembled, but his voice didn't falter. I know what I saw. He said, louder now, not just to Charles, but to the cameras, to the people, to himself. I watched him do it. Charles lunged a step forward. You're throwing away your whole damn career. For what? For her? His voice cracked as the crowd's shouts grew louder. You think she's going to protect you when this blows up? Alex shook his head. I don't need protection. I need to live with myself. Charles's eyes, wild now, face red, spit flying as he shouted. She's playing you. This is all a setup. He turned toward the crowd, gesturing like a desperate man drowning in his own lie. She's using you, all of you, and you're too blind to see it. But no one was buying it. They saw the way Charles had handled her. They saw the bag. They saw the badge. And now they'd heard the truth. Phones stayed up. Voices rose. Time to cuff that cop. He's done. You're done, man. The noise surged, louder, more chaotic. But through it all, Jasmine stayed still, watching, waiting, unwavering. And in the middle of it, Alex stood alone, exposed, afraid, but free. For the first time since he put on the uniform, he felt like he'd actually honored it. The street was roaring with voices, but Jasmine's voice sliced through the chaos like a blade. She stepped forward, measured, commanding, and spoke with the same tone she'd use in a courtroom, standing before a federal judge. Officer Charles Reddington, she said, her voice unwavering, you are hereby relieved of duty, effective immediately. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The authority in her words was thunder beneath silk. Disarm him. She turned to the local sergeant who had just arrived. Wide-eyed, uncertain. Badge and weapon, now. The sergeant hesitated, caught between loyalty and law. But the look in Jasmine's eyes was not one to challenge. It was the look of a woman who had spent her entire career preparing for this exact moment. A woman who had seen too many men like Charles walk away clean. Not today. Charles's mouth dropped open, like he'd been slapped. You, what? He barked, his voice cracking with disbelief. You can't do that. You don't have that kind of power. His hands twitched toward his belt, out of habit or instinct. But Jasmine didn't flinch. You want to test me? She said quietly. Charles turned, face flushed, veins rising in his neck. He shouted to the onlookers. I've given my whole life to this city. I've protected these streets for 30 damn years. This is how I get treated? His voice cracked as it rose. Less fury now, more desperation. You think she cares about you? He shouted to the crowd. She's here for headlines. She doesn't know what it's like out here. Jasmine stepped forward again. Her heels clicked sharply against the pavement. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. No one, she said, gets to hide behind the word protector while planting evidence on an innocent civilian. The crowd quieted, as if the weight of her words demanded silence. You don't get to weaponize your uniform to cover for bias, violence, or lies. That's not service. That's betrayal. Charles scoffed, shaking his head violently, pacing like a caged animal. You think you're the law? He snapped. I am the law out here. I know what keeps these streets safe. Jasmine's expression didn't change, but her next words landed like a verdict. No one is above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it, especially not them. She turned to the sergeant again. Sergeant Lewis, that's a direct order. Disarm him. If you refuse, you're complicit. The sergeant blinked hard, then nodded. He stepped toward Charles, eyes low, voice quiet. Lieutenant, hand me your weapon and badge. For a moment, Charles just stared. Disbelief. Rage. Something broken flickering behind his eyes. Then, he exploded. You people don't get it. I kept this city from burning. While you sat in offices pushing paper, I was out there in the dark. I've walked alleys no one else would. I bled for this town. He pointed a trembling finger at Jasmine. You roll in with your suits and your titles and think you can judge me? You don't know what it's like to actually protect something. Jasmine took one final step forward, her voice like born iron wrapped in velvet. I know exactly what it's like to protect something worth saving, to protect people who've been silenced, beaten, framed, threatened. People like the woman you just tried to destroy, with one lie in a plastic bag. She paused, letting the weight settle, then calm and lethal. No one gets to call themselves a protector when their weapon is fear and their shield is a lie. The crowd barely fell into a stunned hush. Even the phones were lowered for a breath. The moment was too real, too raw to filter through a lens. Charles stood, motionless. His mouth opened, then closed. The color drained from his face as Sergeant Lewis stepped closer. Quietly, he unhooked Charles's weapon, clipped the badge from his chest. The metal didn't just leave his uniform, it left his identity. The man who had once commanded streets was now just a man, stripped down in the middle of the city he claimed to defend. And Jasmine? She stood still, not triumphant, not smug, just steady, finally being heard. Let me know if you'd like to continue with the fallout and final reckoning, or transition into a public statement or press scene from Jasmine. The street had never been louder, and yet, as Jasmine turned to face the cameras, the world fell quiet. The crowd, once crackling with outrage, shifted into a hush as phones steadied and lenses focused. Several local news vans had already rolled up to the curb. Microphones stretched forward like hands reaching for truth. Officers on the edge of the scene froze where they stood, uncertain if they were witnessing a press conference or a revolution. Jasmine inhaled once, steady, slow. She adjusted her blazer, lifted her chin, and stepped into the clearing where the sidewalk met the street. Her heels clicked like a gavel striking wood. Every phone, every eye, every camera turned to her. She didn't look like someone who had just been publicly violated. She looked like someone who had survived it and stood taller because of it. My name, she began, voice calm but resonant, is Jasmine Crockett. Her tone, free of bitterness, but full of weight. And while I serve in the Department of Justice as a federal civil rights investigator, that's not the title I'm standing here under right now. She paused. The wind caught her hair, brushing it gently across her cheek. She pushed it back, never breaking focus. I'm not here as a badge. I'm not here as a title. I'm standing here as what too many people forget I am, a citizen. The crowd had leaned in. Even the officers who hadn't said a word all afternoon turned toward her now. Alex stood just behind her, rooted in place. His hands still trembled faintly, but his heart no longer did. I didn't come here looking for trouble, Jasmine said. I came here to meet a client. I parked my car, obeyed every law, answered every question, complied with every instruction, even the ones that were unlawful. Her voice didn't crack. It got stronger. And still, that wasn't enough. Murmurs rolled across the street like thunder. I was accused, harassed, grabbed, searched, humiliated. And then, when all of that still failed to justify the abuse, I was framed. She held up the evidence bag Charles had tried to use against her. This was planted in my car by a man who wore the same uniform I once respected. A man who took an oath, not just to protect the public, but to uphold the law. Today, he broke that oath. And today, he was held accountable. Someone in the crowd clapped. Others followed. It wasn't an explosion, but it was building. "I want to be clear," Jasmine said, eyes sweeping across every camera in sight. "I'm not here for vengeance. I'm not here for applause. I'm here to say that what happened to me today, what almost happened to me, isn't rare. It's not an exception. It's not unique to my story. It's the same story that plays out in parking lots, alleyways, front porches, and traffic stops across this country, where silence and fear protect the powerful and innocent people pay the price." Her gaze shifted, just slightly, back to Alex, then to the crowd. "But today," she said, "the truth had a witness, and the silence aren't broke." A collective breath moved through the people like wind through trees. The man who had been filming from his truck lowered his phone slightly, his eyes now glassy. The woman from the porch leaned against the railing, whispering "thank you" like a prayer. One by one, heads nodded, not just in agreement, but in recognition. I want every person watching this, whether from your phone, your living room, or a courtroom, to hear me. Her voice dropped just a note, but somehow they felt louder. I'm not standing here as someone with a government title. I'm standing here as someone with a heartbeat and rights and a voice that refuses to be ignored. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm demanding equal treatment, because justice isn't justice if it only applies when it's convenient. The applause this time came faster, louder. People stepped forward from the sidewalks. Officers behind the barricades shifted their weight. One lowered his head. And behind Jasmine, Alex Reyes stood still, but inside him, something had moved. He looked down at the badge on his chest. For the first time since he pinned it on, it didn't feel like a decoration, or a shield, or a burden. It felt like a promise, one that had gone unkept for too long. He looked at Jasmine, silhouetted against a fading sun and a rising crowd, and understood something no class or academy could teach, that sometimes the bravest thing a badge can do is stand beside someone who doesn't have one. That protection isn't about power, it's about truth. And finally, he was ready to live up to it. Jasmine turned slightly, just enough to see him. She gave the smallest nod. No words, just the beginning of a new oath. Spoken, not with mouths, but with action. Not from a podium, but from the street. Where justice was no longer waiting to be served, it was already happening. The speech was over, but the impact had only just begun. Within hours, the footage from the scene had gone viral. One clip, recorded by a teenager across the street, was viewed over 12 million times, one in less than 24 hours. Her caption was simple. She was framed, and she stood her ground. The internet ignited. Hashtags like #Justice for Jasmine, #Badge and Bag, #Unfit to Serve climbed Twitter's trending list. CNN cut into regular programming to show the unedited live stream from Montgomery. ABC's legal analysts played the clip of Charles planting the evidence on loop, dissecting it frame by frame. The New York Times ran a Sunday cover story titled, "The Stop That Broke the Silence." Every major network had an opinion, but the facts spoke louder. A decorated officer caught red-handed, a federal investigator nearly railroaded in public, and a rookie cop whose courage cracked open the wall of silence. Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a name. She was now the face of a national reckoning. The next morning, the U.S. Department of Justice announced the formation of a special civil rights task force. At a hastily arranged press conference, the deputy AG stood behind a podium and spoke into a dozen microphones. This was not just an isolated abuse of power. This was a systemic failure of oversight, trust, and accountability. and we intend to pursue it at every level. By midday, subpoenas had been issued. Charles Reddington's entire disciplinary file was unsealed. What began as a single misconduct accusation unraveled into a trail of buried complaints, closed-door settlements, and mysteriously lost evidence logs going back nearly a decade. Reporters dug up internal memos. Lawyers came forward. So did former patrol partners. And then, victims, dozens of them. Each with their own version of the same story. Same neighborhoods, same excuses, same officer. This time, the country was watching, and no one could look away. Outside the Montgomery Police Department, a sea of protest signs rose like a second skyline. Thousands filled the streets. Local residents, civil rights groups, students, clergy. Some wore shirts with Jasmine's face on them. Others held up mirrors taped with words, "This could have been me." Chants echoed through the city like a heartbeat that refused to stop. No more silence. No more shields for lies. Protect the people, not your power. News helicopters hovered above the courthouse. City officials scrambled below. The mayor issued a public apology, but was booed off the steps of City Hall when she failed to call for the police chief's resignation. Overnight, 6 more officers in Charles's unit were placed on administrative leave. The anonymous sources leaked emails, some implicating senior officials who had looked the other way for years. The movement didn't stay local. In Chicago, crowds held candlelight vigils outside precincts with known corruption records. In Atlanta, officers marched side by side with citizens, holding signs that read, "Serve, not silence." In New York, civil rights lawyers filed a class action suit demanding federal oversight for 5 police departments. In Los Angeles, 1,000 high school students walked out of class in support of Jasmine Crockett's civil rights bill, already gaining traction in the House Judiciary Committee. Meanwhile, Jasmine refused every talk show offer. She declined interviews, endorsements, speaking gigs. Instead, she stayed in Montgomery, walking the same streets where she had been profiled, visiting legal aid offices, working beside those who had long fought without recognition. Cameras still followed her, but she no longer stood in front of them. She stood beside the people who'd been ignored for far too long. And Alex Reyes? He became the reluctant center of another wave. His testimony, raw, recorded, and repeated by every network, was called the most important sentence spoken by a rookie officer in modern history. Half the force hated him. The other half one whispered thank you in the locker room when no one else was listening. He was labeled a traitor by some, a hero by others. But Alex didn't care about the headlines. He cared about the silence that had finally been broken and the price it came with. One night, standing outside a protest with a borrowed hoodie and hands in his pockets, he was approached by a teenage boy. Couldn't be more than 16. "You the cop who told the truth?" the boy asked. Alex was nodded slowly. The boy looked up at him, then offered something small, almost shy. "Thanks. You made it feel like we matter." And for Alex, that meant more than any promotion ever could. The world outside was on fire with truth, but inside the department, the air was ice cold. 3 days after the incident, Alex Reyes stood in front of a long, polished table inside a windowless conference room buried deep within the Montgomery Police Department. Fluorescent lights buzzed above his head like angry wasps. The walls were a dull beige, chipped in places, but the silence was the loudest thing in the room. 5 men sat on the other side of the table, 2 deputy chiefs, a legal advisor, an internal affairs rep, and Captain Nolan. And they all wore the same look, tight-lipped, unreadable, like they were trying to figure out whether Alex was a liability or a symbol. He stood tall, shoulders squared, but his fists clenched inside his sleeves. There was no badge on his chest today, no belt, no sidearm, just the weight of his conscience and the echo of a city still shouting his name. "You've put this department in a very difficult position, Officer Reyes," Nolan said, his voice cool and rehearsed. "What you did out there, what you said, it was unprecedented." Alex didn't blink. It was the truth. A rustle of papers. A slow exhale from the legal advisor. Then, the voice that cut through it all. A deep, gravel-lined tone from the far end of the table. Sergeant Monroe. Decorated. Feared. Old school to the bone. He leaned forward, arms crossed, eyes hard as nails. "You didn't just speak out," he said. "You betrayed the badge. You embarrassed this department in front of the entire country." The room went still. "You turned your back on your brothers in blue." Alex's jaw tightened, but his voice didn't shake. "No, Sergeant," he said. "I didn't turn my back on the badge. I turned my back on the lies hiding behind it." He stepped forward, just slightly. "If the truth embarrasses us, then we should be embarrassed. If accountability is betrayal, then maybe this department has forgotten what it was sworn to protect." Monroe stood. The chair screeched back violently. His hand slammed down on the table, knuckles white. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he growled. "You think this is noble? You undermined every cop who's ever bled for that uniform." Alex met his glare, eyes burning now, not with anger but conviction. "I didn't undermine the uniform," he said. "I exposed the rot that's been wearing it." His voice rose. "If protecting the badge means protecting corruption, then it's not the badge I'm loyal to. It's justice." The room fell quiet again, heavy, charged. But the silence this time didn't feel like isolation. It felt like cracks forming, because someone shifted in the corner. A younger officer, patrol division, barely a year in. He looked nervous, then looked up. "I saw what you did," he said softly but clearly. "And I just wanted to say, thank you. You said what the rest of us never dared to." All heads turned. Another voice followed, this time from a woman in narcotics, maybe late 20s. "It's true," she said. "We've seen things, heard things. But the system doesn't make space for truth, not until someone punches through it." Monroe's eyes flashed, but the room was already turning. One more officer, an academy classmate of Alex's, nodded quietly. "You didn't just speak for Jasmine," he said. "You spoke for all of us who've been afraid to open our mouths." The panel looked shaken now, not angry, but exposed. The room that had once felt like a firing squad now felt like a confession booth, and Alex stood at the center of it, the weight of his truth no longer a burden, but a banner. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just looked at them and said calmly, "If being honest gets me fired, so be it. I didn't take this job to be silent. I took it to serve the people. All of them. Not just the ones who look like me. Not just the ones who make it easy." Outside, the building trembled with chants from the crowd still protesting outside. Inside, the silence had changed. It wasn't suppression anymore. It was reckoning. And it had a voice now. The storm had passed, but Jasmine knew the real work was only just beginning. 2 weeks after the investigation exploded across national headlines, she stood at the podium in Washington, D.C. Not as a victim, not as a whistleblower, but as a voice for change. The room was packed. Journalists lined the walls, senators filled the front row, and behind them, leaders from police departments across the country sat stiffly in their chairs. C-SPAN streamed it live. Twitter hashtags tracked it in real time. Every word she was about to speak would be replayed, dissected, and remembered. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She adjusted the mic, scanned the room, and began, not with outrage, but with truth. "I wasn't framed because I broke the law," she said. "I was framed because I represented a threat to a system that protects itself first and serves the people second." She paused, letting that hang. "But I'm not here today to burn it down. I'm here to rebuild it, brick by brick, badge by badge." A murmur of applause, then silence again, as she continued. "I'm proud to announce a federal initiative called Shield of Honor, a nationwide ethics and tactical training program for law enforcement," she said. "It will combine advanced scenario-based training, community engagement strategy, and mandatory cultural literacy." She clicked a remote, and behind her, the first slide of the program lit up. "This isn't about punishing police," Jasmine said. "It's about reminding them who they swore to protect. It's about reteaching courage, the kind it takes to stop your own when they cross the line." In the second row, Alex sat in a crisp gray suit, not in uniform, not today. He hadn't spoken much to the press since the hearing. He didn't need to. His actions had said enough. But when Jasmine had asked him to help design the curriculum, he didn't hesitate. Not because he was a hero, but because he knew exactly what kind of silence it took to let corruption breathe, and what kind of training might finally break that pattern. And for the first time since graduation, he believed in the job again. Jasmine continued, her voice stronger with every word. Shield of Honor will partner directly with DOJ oversight teams and independent civilian boards. No more internal reviews hidden behind closed doors. No more loyalty tests in place of justice. Her gaze scanned the room. And the program won't be run by bureaucrats. It'll be built by people who've lived this. Officers who chose truth. Communities that were silenced. People who said, enough. She turned briefly, nodding toward Alex without needing to say his name. The audience followed her eyes. They recognized him, and they applauded. Behind closed doors, accountability had finally turned into action. The Justice Department confirmed that 7 additional officers from Montgomery PD, once protected by silence, had been officially dismissed for sustained misconduct. Their records, once buried, were now open for public review. Lawsuits were being revisited. Past convictions connected to Reddington's task force were under audit. And the message couldn't have been clearer. The Shield no longer protected corruption. In cities like Minneapolis, Cleveland, and Baton Rouge, police chiefs publicly endorsed Shield of Honor. Pilot programs launched in 5 precincts within a month. Officers participated in VR de-escalation drills, role-play interviews, real-time stress scenario responses designed by psychologists, legal analysts, and, yes, Alex Reyes. Every training began with a quote, engraved on the wall of the first training center in D.C. Silence protects power. Truth protects people. And for the first time in years, trust began to return. Not overnight, not completely, but enough. Enough for a black mother in Montgomery to let her son ride his bike again after dark. Enough for a Latino father in Phoenix to stop flinching when sirens passed. Enough for a rookie officer in New Jersey to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. Because the system wasn't just being policed, it was being rewired. And at the heart of it stood Jasmine. A woman who had once been pulled from her car like a criminal, now building the blueprint to keep it from ever happening again. And beside her, Alex, no longer silent. Now a teacher, a builder, a voice. One that other officers, especially the quiet ones, were finally learning to follow. Months had passed since the chaos, since the headlines, since the world stopped and listened. But today, in a quiet hall tucked behind the new National Law Enforcement Training Center, there were no cameras, no protests, no microphones, just 70 folding chairs. And inside them sat 70 new recruits, fresh faces, straight backs, polished boots. Some looked excited, others nervous. A few held pens, ready to impress. All of them were silent as the doors closed and the air grew still. Then Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the stage. No uniform, no badge, just the quiet presence of someone who had already lived through every consequence they were about to study. She wore a dark navy suit, the same kind she'd worn the day Charles Reddington tried to erase her. She didn't smile. She didn't posture. She stood center stage and let the silence pull them in. These seats, she began, her voice calm but powerful, don't just hold bodies, they hold choices. She paused, eyes sweeping across the room. Some of you are here to serve. Some of you are here to prove something, and a few of you might already think you know everything. There were no laughs, just attention. But I'm not here today to talk about tactics or law, Jasmine continued. I'm here to talk about silence. Because it's not the bullets or the beatings that destroy trust. It's the silence that lets them happen. She took a single step forward, heels clicking on the polished floor. I don't need you to be hero, she said. I don't need you to leap into danger or make headlines. Another pause, then the words landed like a gavel. I need you not to be the ones who stay quiet. The room held its breath. At that moment, the side door opened quietly, and Alex Reyes stepped in. He no longer looked like the unsure rookie who once sat silently in a patrol car, torn between fear and duty. He carried himself with purpose now, measured, calm, resolute. A scar ran lightly above one eyebrow, a physical memory of everything that had happened since. In his hands was a thick stack of booklets, each printed in bold blue with a title across the top. From Justice to Action, the officer's responsibility to speak. The cadets turned their heads as he walked in. Some recognized him. Most had heard his story. All of them leaned in a little closer. Jasmine looked at him and nodded. Not for show, not for theatrics. Just quiet acknowledgement, a passing of the torch. Then she turned back to the recruits. Each of you will leave this place with the authority to detain, to question, to protect. But before you ever reach for that badge, you'll read every page of that manual, she said, and you'll learn not just how to spot injustice, but how to stand up against it. Because when you wear the uniform, your silence has power too. Alex reached the front of the room and placed the stack of manuals on the desk. He didn't speak yet. He didn't have to. Jasmine looked back at the crowd one last time. Your job, she said, isn't just to enforce the law. It's to protect those who've been crushed beneath it. And you can't do that if you're afraid to speak when it matters most. The silence that followed was different now. Not nervous, not unsure. It was intentional. Like the recruits had just seen the weight of the world and were deciding whether or not they were ready to carry it. Then Jasmine stepped down from the stage and walked past Alex. She stopped briefly at his side, and without turning, she said under her breath, "They're yours now." Alex watched her walk away. And then for the first time in his life, he turned to face a room full of future officers, not as a trainee, not as a witness, but as a teacher. He picked up the top copy of the manual, opened to page 1, and began. Let's talk about silence. Outside the training hall, the sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows across the concrete, the kind that blur the lines between day and night, between what was and what comes next. Inside, chairs creaked as cadets shifted in their seats, eyes still fixed on the front of the room. The silence heavy not with confusion, but with clarity. And somewhere in that stillness, a truth began to settle. Not the kind etched in textbooks or printed on law codes, but the kind that lives in the spaces between action and inaction, between seeing wrong and choosing to do something about it. Because if this story taught us anything, it's that injustice doesn't always announce itself with sirens. Sometimes it wears a badge. Sometimes it holds a clipboard. Sometimes it says nothing at all. And that silence is where it festers, hidden behind layers of protocol, tradition, and fear. Jasmine Crockett didn't survive that day because she was special. She survived because she refused to let fear define her. And Alex Reyes? He didn't become a hero by chasing danger. He became one by choosing the one thing most people run from, the truth. This story wasn't just about power. It was about who we become when power is abused right in front of us. It was about the cost of complicity and the courage it takes to break away from it. Jasmine faced the full force of a system that wanted her silent. Alex faced a culture that told him loyalty was worth more than justice, and yet both stood up, not for themselves but for something bigger. For the countless people who never got the chance to fight back, for the names that never made headlines, for the voices that died in the dark. And the lesson? That real justice isn't loud. It doesn't need flashing lights or dramatic takedowns. Real justice is choosing not to look away. It's standing up when you're the only one who will. It's calling out the lie even when it wears the same uniform you do. In a world so easily numbed by outrage, this story reminds us that the quietest moments, one woman's voice, one rookie's truth, can shift everything. Not every battle is fought with weapons. Some are fought with conviction. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to stay silent. Let me know if you'd like this turned into a voiceover monologue for film or written as an epigraph-style message before end credits. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. Elena Moore walked into a high-end boutique and was publicly humiliated for looking too ordinary. They didn't recognize her. former CEO, designer for Givenchy, worth millions. 5 minutes later, her sister, Jasmine Crockett, a powerhouse civil rights attorney, stormed in, and the entire boutique froze. Judgment turned to panic. Whispers turned to silence. What did she say that collapsed a luxury empire in front of everyone's eyes? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Le Diamant was more than a boutique. It was a social filter dressed in marble and glass. Every inch of it screamed silent judgment. The hushed jazz, the scent of rare oud, the way the lighting hit the dresses like they were holy relics. But beneath the polished luxury, there was an unspoken law. Only those who looked the part were allowed in. No signs were needed. The stairs did the job. And the enforcer of these invisible rules? Francesca Delacroix, the manager with eyes sharper than any security system. She didn't greet you, she scanned you. Shoes first, then bag, then posture. If your heels weren't designer or your watch wasn't whispering wealth, you were labeled not our kind before you even touched a hanger. Francesca wasn't cruel with words. She didn't need to be. Her power was in suggestion, her elegance a weapon. Can I help you find something more casual? Always meant, you don't belong here. She saw luxury not as art, but as armor, meant to protect the elite from the ordinary. But Francesca's empire of appearances was about to clash with someone who refused to play by the rules. Eleanor Moore stepped into Le Diamant like a breeze slipping through armor, silent, effortless, unreadable. She wore a light gray coat, clean white sneakers, and black sunglasses that covered more than just her eyes. They hid her story. Her skin was a rich bronze, her hair pulled into a tight bun, and she carried no purse, no jewelry, no signal of wealth. To the untrained eye, she looked like a tourist. But what no one knew was that Elena once ruled an empire. She was the former CEO of Aurelia Group, the design firm behind Europe's most opulent spaces. She left it all behind after a scandalous divorce from a billionaire that turned her life into tabloid fuel. Now she lived quietly by choice. Francesca didn't blink. One glance was all it took. The door had barely clicked shut behind the woman when her brain issued a verdict as sharp as her stilettos. Not a client. Her eyes scanned Elena Moore with surgical precision, moving from the spotless but unbranded sneakers to the soft gray coat that whispered comfort. Not couture. No designer handbag, no statement jewelry, no signs of nervousness or effort to impress. And that, to Francesca, was the biggest offense of all. If you weren't trying to be seen in Le Diamant, then why were you here? She watched the woman move, calm, casual, unhurried, and every cell in Francesca's body recoiled. This wasn't the stride of a wealthy regular or a new money debutante. This was a woman with no intent to prove herself, which meant one thing: waste of time. The judgment happened silently but with lethal clarity. Francesca didn't need confirmation from anyone. She had built her reputation on these snap calls, spotting the serious from the strays. And Elena, in Francesca's mind, was the latter: a stray, a drifter. A woman who wandered in off Rodeo Drive to marvel at what she couldn't touch. The kind who might pretend to shop, maybe even dare to try something on, only to vanish before the card machine ever beeped. She had no stylist, no assistant, no obvious appointment. No one called ahead, no limo waited outside. To Francesca, that wasn't mystery. It was mediocrity. And mediocrity had no place in her store. Without saying a word, Francesca sent a silent signal to her staff. Subtle, practiced, unkind. Watch her. Don't engage. She won't buy. She doesn't belong. Elena moved slowly between the displays, her steps soft, her gaze steady. She didn't rush. She didn't reach out impulsively. Instead, she paused in front of each piece with quiet appreciation, examining the stitching, the cut, the balance of color and silhouette. Her fingers hovered inches away from the fabric, never touching, just observing, like someone who truly understood craftsmanship. She wasn't there to impress. She wasn't there to flaunt. And that's what made her so unsettling in Francesca's eyes. Elena didn't look around nervously. She didn't try to make conversation. She simply existed in the space like she had every right to be there. And to Francesca, that was unacceptable. In a place where wealth was worn like armor, Someone moving with quiet confidence and no visible status was a threat. Francesca watched her for another moment, then smoothed her blazer and stepped forward. Her heels clicked softly against the marble as she approached. Each step rehearsed, her expression perfectly composed. She wore her usual smile, welcoming on the surface, but hollow if you looked too long. "Good afternoon," she said smoothly, her voice carrying just enough volume to remind the room who was in control. Elena turned slightly, nodded in greeting, her expression calm. "Finding everything all right?" Francesca continued, hands clasped loosely in front of her. She glanced down at Elena's sneakers, just long enough to make the meaning clear. Elena gave a polite smile. "Just looking." There was a pause, a breath. Then Francesca leaned in, her voice soft, but her words sharpened like glass. "If I may," she said, gesturing gently toward the entrance, "you might enjoy one of our sister stores just a few blocks down on 3rd Avenue. They carry more casual pieces, much easier to wear." She didn't blink. She didn't need to. Every syllable was calculated, wrapped in courtesy, delivered like a velvet-coated insult. The tone said it all. "You don't belong here. Try somewhere less refined." Elena didn't flinch. She didn't speak. But something in her eyes shifted, barely, but enough to register. She had been judged, sized up, and dismissed before opening her mouth. Not because of what she said, not because of what she did, but simply because she didn't look expensive enough to be taken seriously. Elena continued walking slowly between the racks, her steps even, her breathing steady. She paused at a navy coat with a hand-stitched lining and lifted the price tag gently. $42,000. She said nothing. She wasn't shocked, not by the price, not by the quality, and certainly not by the way she was being treated. What she noticed wasn't in the clothing. It was in the details they thought she'd miss. The woman seated on the velvet bench to her left had been handed a glass of champagne the moment she sat down. Offered without asking, with a smile and a quiet, "Miss Caldwell, welcome back." Another assistant rushed to place her shopping bags neatly by her side, calling her by name like she was royalty returning from battle. Elena, meanwhile, had been inside for nearly 10 minutes. No one had greeted her. No one had even asked if she'd like water. She hadn't been looked in the eye once since the manager's thinly veiled suggestion that she go somewhere more casual. But Elena wasn't offended. She was aware, sharply, painfully aware. She knew what this was, what it had always been. The kind of quiet exclusion that dressed itself in manners and smiled while shutting the door in your face. She didn't need them to say it. The message was clear. "You're not one of us." Her clothes didn't scream wealth. Her walk didn't beg attention. And in a place like Le Diamant, that made her invisible. But what they didn't realize, what they never seemed to realize, was that Elena didn't need their validation. She wasn't searching for acceptance. She wasn't there to impress anyone. What she was doing, in fact, was watching, closely, quietly, intentionally. And what she saw only confirmed what she already knew. In places like this, respect wasn't given freely. It was rationed, carefully, strategically, offered only to those who looked the part. Her eyes scanned the room like a slow-moving camera, catching every nuance. The subtle shift in tone when a white man asked a question and received a detailed, cheerful response. The way a younger staff member hesitated before looking in her direction, then quickly busied herself with folding scarves that didn't need folding. Every gesture, every omission, every carefully polite insult was recorded in her mind. Not with anger, but with clarity. And through it all, Elena never lost her smile. Not because she was unaffected, but because she had learned long ago. Smiling was her shield, quiet was her weapon, and memory was her revenge. But not everyone in the boutique was blind to what was happening. From behind the counter, Emily watched in silence. She was only a few weeks into her internship at Le Diamant, still learning the choreography of luxury, the smiles, the scripts, the unspoken rules. Her blazer was slightly too big, her heels uncomfortable, and her confidence still shaky. But she had good instincts, and something about what she was seeing didn't feel right. She had noticed the champagne that was never offered, the greetings that skipped over Elena, the polite avoidance wrapped in expensive fabric and perfect posture. She glanced at Francesca, who stood just a few steps away, her face calm, her stance proud, as if the way she dismissed someone so quietly was part of the boutique's design. Emily swallowed hard. She had admired Francesca's elegance. Until now. For the first time, she began to question everything she'd been told. The client profiles, the idea of protecting the brand, the subtle training that taught her who deserved attention and who didn't. It was all framed as strategy, as discretion. But today it looked more like cruelty wearing silk gloves. Emily looked at Elena again, still calm, still polite, still invisible, and it stung. Not because Elena reacted, but because she didn't. Because she had clearly been through this before, and no one had ever stopped it. Emily's hands fidgeted at her sides. She wanted to say something, anything. But she didn't know how to step out of the script she had been taught, the one where silence meant professionalism, where watching someone be excluded was just part of a normal day. But in that moment, something inside her shifted, and once it moved, it wouldn't go back. And then, without asking permission or glancing around for approval, Elena reached for the dress. The black one. It wasn't just any dress. It was the dress. The centerpiece of that week's collection. Pure silk, hand-stitched in Paris, tailored for form without apology. Its price tag read $39,800, but no one dared mention the number aloud. It wasn't for sale to just anyone. It was displayed at an angle with deliberate lighting that made the fabric shimmer like still water. Most customers looked at it from a distance. Some asked. Few tried it. And yet here was Elena, standing in front of it in sneakers and a gray coat, fingers lightly grazing the hanger like she had every right in the world to do so. She didn't grab it. She didn't hesitate. She lifted it from the rack with calm, fluid motion, like someone trained in detail, not show. She turned it slightly toward the light and examined the stitching as if she knew exactly what she was looking at. She did. Across the room, Francesca froze mid-conversation. Her eyes locked onto Elena with silent alarm, the kind that came from years of protecting status like a secret recipe. She excused herself politely from the client beside her, but her expression had already shifted. Her jaw tightened behind the smile. Her footsteps, though measured, carried weight. As she approached, she smoothed her blazer, preparing for what she thought would be a gentle correction. But inside, her irritation flared. That dress wasn't just fabric. It was a silent contract, one she never intended to offer to someone who walked in unannounced, unstyled, and unimpressed. To her, this wasn't just about clothing. It was about control. Francesca stopped just beside Elena, close enough to invade her space, but far enough to maintain the illusion of courtesy. "That piece," she said, her voice like honey over ice, "is quite special." Elena glanced sideways but said nothing. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just holding a dress. Francesca continued, her tone soft, but each word more pointed than the last. "It's part of a limited collection, very rare, designed for women who understand the art of movement, posture, presence." She gave a brief, practiced laugh, as if trying to make it sound like a compliment. "It's not just about wearing it, it's about becoming it." Her eyes swept from Elena's casual outfit to her calm expression, and then rested on her face. "Some silhouettes require a particular kind of elegance. Not everyone," she added lightly, "can bring that to life." The words weren't loud, but they cut through the air like broken glass. There was nothing random about them. They were chosen, precise, each one layered with condescension so delicate it would almost pass as customer service, if it weren't so transparently cruel. Around them, the boutique seemed to pause. Emily, standing near the accessories wall, turned slightly, sensing something wasn't right. A client on the couch stopped scrolling her phone and glanced up. No one spoke, but everyone heard it. Francesca had drawn a line, clean, polite, merciless, and Elena was standing on the wrong side of it. But instead of shrinking away, Elena responded, softly, steadily, and with a precision that landed like a quiet bomb. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look angry or offended. In fact, she looked almost at ease, as if nothing about this situation surprised her. Still holding the black dress with careful fingers, she turned slightly to face Francesca more fully and said in a voice just loud enough to carry, "Actually, I designed the interior for Givenchy's Milan showroom, the new one on Via Sant'Andrea." Her tone was gentle, unimpressed, not defensive, just factual, like she was stating the weather. But the weight of those words stopped Francesca cold. Her breath caught for half a beat. It wasn't what Elena said, it was how she said it. No bragging, no effort, just truth. And that made it impossible to ignore. For a split second, Francesca's perfectly controlled face betrayed her. A flicker of confusion crossed her eyes. She blinked once, tight, fast, then gave a polite laugh, the kind that people use when their pride starts to slip. "Oh," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "That must be a coincidence. Same name, maybe." It was a weak deflection, and they both knew it. She didn't ask a follow-up question, didn't request clarification, because deep down she realized she might have made a mistake, but she refused to give Elena the satisfaction of watching her admit it. Francesca had built her entire image on always knowing who people were the moment they walked in. And this woman, this calmly spoken, simply dressed woman, had just shattered that illusion with one sentence. Elena didn't react. She didn't smirk, didn't correct her again. She simply looked at Francesca the way one might look at a child pretending to be taller. Not unkindly, just with clarity. That look said more than words ever could. "I see exactly what you're doing, and it no longer works on me." Around them, the boutique carried on, music playing softly, glassware clinking faintly as champagne was poured elsewhere. But the energy had shifted. It was no longer Francesca holding the frame of the conversation. She had lost control, even if only for a moment, and Elena had taken nothing but the truth to do it. Emily, from a distance, saw it all, the way Francesca stiffened, the way her smile faltered for just a breath too long, and the way Elena didn't have to do anything dramatic to reclaim the dignity that had quietly been stripped from her the moment she walked through the door. It was one of the first times Emily saw power move without force, and she couldn't unsee it. Neither could Francesca. Just as Francesca was trying to piece her control back together, still clinging to her forced smile, still pretending not to feel the shift, Le Diamant's entrance door rotated with a slow, weighty hush, like the start of something no one could stop. The sound was soft, but it broke the boutique's curated calm like a crack across glass. Everyone turned instinctively, even those who had trained themselves never to appear curious. Time didn't stop, but it slowed. Through the last turn of the revolving glass stepped a woman who didn't just enter the room. She commanded it. Jasmine Crockett, civil rights attorney, nationally recognized. Sharp as a blade and twice as fast. Her tailored violet suit fit like armor, the clean lines of the jacket drawing a perfect silhouette of someone who never once doubted her place in a room. Her black pumps hit the marble with a rhythm that felt intentional, every click echoing like punctuation in a courtroom. She wasn't rushed, she wasn't angry, but she was here, and her presence made everyone suddenly feel exposed. Her eyes, focused and unblinking, swept across the boutique like a litmus test for truth. She didn't look around for permission. She looked for the problem, and she found it instantly. On one side of the boutique, clients sipping champagne, chatting in muted tones, assistants circling like orbiting moons. On the other, Elena, standing alone, dress in hand, untouched, unwelcomed, unacknowledged. Jasmine saw it in one glance. She didn't need an explanation. She didn't need context. She had seen it before, in boardrooms, in bank lobbies, in courtrooms dressed as neutral. That quiet, polished exclusion wrapped in good lighting and soft jazz. And so, she stopped. Just a few steps inside the door. She didn't rush toward her sister. She didn't make a scene. She planted her feet like a judge entering chambers, tilted her chin slightly and let her voice cut the air clean in half. "Is someone in here refusing to serve my sister?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The force was in her clarity. The boutique didn't breathe. Not a word, not a step. Jasmine had asked the question, and no one dared answer. She didn't need one. The silence was its own confession. Without missing a beat, she stepped forward, not quickly, not theatrically, but with a calm force that carried the weight of justice and authority. Her heels tapped against the marble floor like a metronome, counting down to something irreversible. She walked past glass displays and stunned clients like they didn't exist. Her eyes never left Elena. The tension in the room wasn't just thick, it was suffocating. Jasmine didn't look left or right. She didn't acknowledge the stares, the whispers, the rising panic radiating off Francesca like heat from a flame. She had come for one person, and she didn't come to ask questions twice. When she reached Elena, she stopped just inches in front of her. Their eyes met, and for the first time since Elena entered the boutique, her guard softened, not because she needed rescuing, but because someone she trusted had finally arrived. Jasmine leaned in, wrapped her arms around her, and pulled her into a firm, quiet hug. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't for show. It was real, protective, grounding, and completely unshakable. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice low and even. "Did I get here in time?" There was no fear in her tone, no anger, just precision, as if she already knew the answer, but wanted to give Elena the chance to speak it herself. And in that moment, the boutique, this cathedral of curated silence, held its breath like a courtroom awaiting a verdict. Francesca didn't move. Her body was frozen, jaw tight, shoulders locked in place, her mind scrambling for a response she didn't have. Her authority, so absolute just minutes ago, was now slipping through her fingers like sand. She didn't know where to look: at Jasmine, whose presence threatened to collapse everything, or at Elena, whose silence had become more powerful than any raised voice. A seated VIP leaned in toward her companion and whispered, breath shaky, "That's Jasmine Crockett." The name didn't need explanation. It landed with impact. The woman who took down discriminatory corporations. The one who made headlines for turning legal battles into public reckonings. Recognition rippled through the room like electricity. One by one, clients began to understand the weight of what they were witnessing. Phones were now subtly lifted behind handbags. Eyes darted between the three women, one silent, one crumbling, one in control. Francesca's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. No script had prepared her for this. She wasn't just facing a difficult client anymore. She was facing someone who had power in a language she couldn't fake. Truth. And Jasmine hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made a scene. All she had done was walk across the room and ask a question. But that question, simple, direct, undeniable, had turned the floor beneath Francesca into glass. And everyone in the boutique was waiting to see if it would crack. The hug broke, but the silence didn't. Jasmine stepped back, her body still between Elena and the rest of the room. And that's when she turned. Her head tilted slightly, her posture straight, voice calm and crystal clear. "Do you know who she is?" Jasmine asked, eyes locked onto Francesca with unshakable precision. Her tone wasn't loud, but it rang through the boutique like a hammer on glass. "Do you even care who she is?" Francesca opened her mouth, but no sound came. Her throat clenched, her eyes flicking to Elena, then to the staff, then back to Jasmine, looking for an exit that wasn't there. Jasmine didn't wait. "That's Elena Moore," she continued, pacing forward a single step, her voice still composed, but hardening like cooling steel. "Former CEO of the Aurelia Group, the woman who designed showrooms for Givenchy, Balmain, and two of the top luxury hotels in Europe." Murmurs rippled through the room like static. Heads turned. Some mouths hung open. One VIP client leaned forward slightly, suddenly alert. Jasmine didn't flinch. "And today," she said, eyes narrowing, "you dismissed her. You ignored her. You patronized her. Why? Because she wore sneakers? Because she didn't announce her net worth at the door?" She stepped closer. "Or was it something else?" Now her voice dropped lower, more deliberate, each syllable heavy with intent. "Was it because she's a black woman who doesn't walk in here dripping with labels? Was that too complicated for your definition of luxury?" Francesca's lips parted in reflex, hands rising as if to gesture something soft, something safe. I wasn't aware," she stammered, voice dry, thin, breaking under pressure. "We have certain service standards. Guidelines, really. I was just following protocol. Her breath hitched as she tried to regain footing. It's about protecting the experience for our clientele. We've always been selective. That's all. Jasmine smiled, but it wasn't kind. It was razor sharp, measured, and deadly quiet. Selective, she repeated, tasting the word like it was poison. So that's what we're calling it now. She stepped forward again, not aggressively, but with the unwavering calm of someone trained to dismantle lies for a living. You know, the law used to have standards too. Rules about who could sit at the front of a bus, who could enter through which door, who could buy property where. They were all called policy until people stood up and named them for what they really were. Discrimination. The last word landed with finality and the room felt it. Even the air seemed to hold still. Francesca's face lost its color. She tried to speak, but Jasmine raised a hand, not rudely, just enough to stop her. You didn't just misjudge a client, she said, voice now quiet enough to make people lean in. You revealed something deeper, something ugly. And the worst part? You still don't think you did anything wrong. That's the real luxury here, isn't it? The privilege to offend and call it procedure. Behind her, Emily, the young intern, looked like she was holding her breath. One of the other associates slowly placed the champagne tray down, hands trembling just slightly. Jasmine glanced around the boutique, scanning the silent audience of stunned clients and tense staff. Let me guess, she said, gesturing slightly toward the others. She didn't fit the image, didn't perform the part. No high heels, no flashy watch. So she was invisible to you. Disposable. She turned her eyes back to Francesca. But let me ask you this. If the roles were reversed, if someone like Elena had walked in here in your clothes and you stood there in sneakers, would you have treated her the same way? Francesca froze. Completely. Her mouth hung open, words caught behind fear and pride. Her silence finally said everything. Jasmine let the silence sit, let the room feel it. Then she stepped back toward Elena, not looking away from Francesca until the last possible second. You don't get to define elegance, she said, now speaking to the room as much as to Francesca. You don't get to decide who deserves respect based on a pair of shoes. Her voice softened, but the edge stayed. And you definitely don't get to gatekeep dignity with a name tag and a tight smile. That line cut through the boutique like a clean blade. One woman near the dressing room quietly put down the dress she had been holding. Another pulled her phone out from under her clutch, clearly recording. Francesca, still frozen, looked like a statue under direct light, beautiful, brittle, and dangerously close to cracking. Her hands clenched the clipboard in front of her, like it might save her. Her carefully applied foundation couldn't mask the flush rising beneath her skin. Her mouth moved, but there was nothing left to say. No defense that wouldn't sound ridiculous. No explanation that wouldn't make it worse. And Jasmine just stood there unbothered, because she had already won. Not through volume, not through aggression, but by speaking truth clearly, without apology. That was her weapon, and in that room it was more powerful than any brand name in sight. Jasmine turned to Elena again, her voice dropping to something almost tender. You ready to leave this place? Elena gave a soft smile, barely nodding, and that was the final blow. Because even without a single raised voice, Francesca had been dismantled, exposed not as elegant, but as hollow, and no dress in that boutique could ever cover that. The silence that followed Jasmine's words wasn't peaceful. It was devastating. And then finally someone moved. Across the room, a woman in a white designer pantsuit, diamond earrings, sleek blowout, the kind of client Francesca usually catered to like royalty, stood up from the velvet sofa. She didn't look rushed. She didn't even look angry. She looked disappointed, and that made it worse. She placed her untouched champagne flute on the marble table beside her, adjusted her cufflink, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, I don't spend my money in places that don't respect people. Her voice was calm but firm, echoing through the boutique like a final judgment. Then she turned and walked out, slowly, deliberately, with the posture of someone who knew others would follow. Francesca stood frozen, her mouth open slightly as if to call out, to explain, to spin. but no words came. She looked around, hoping for support, but the boutique had turned. The energy had shifted. The image she had built, flawless, untouchable, elite, was collapsing under the weight of one truth. She had been seen, truly seen, and the room no longer admired her for it. More whispers rippled behind clothing racks. Another customer rose, checking her phone, eyes wide. Someone at the entrance nudged their partner, then opened the door to leave. It had started, the unraveling, and Francesca could feel it in her chest like a scream that hadn't yet made it to her throat. Behind the register, Emily stood perfectly still, heart pounding in her ears. Her hands were shaking, but her decision had already been made. Slowly, she reached up and unclipped her name tag, the same tag she had been proud of just weeks ago. She stared at it for a moment, then walked to the counter. Her heels felt heavier with every step, but her voice was clear when she placed the tag on the polished surface. "I didn't go to school to become part of this," she said softly, but everyone heard her. "I'm not here to help humiliate people." Then she looked directly at Elena, not at Francesca, and gave her a small, apologetic nod, one filled with shame and with quiet courage. No one stopped her, not a single person, not even Francesca, who now looked like a statue, still standing but lifeless. Emily walked past her manager without a glance, past the silent assistants, past the still recording phones. She walked out the door without slamming it, without tears. Just a clean, straight exit that somehow made more noise than a full-blown scene, the kind of exit you don't forget. Back inside, a soft chime sounded, a notification from someone's phone, then another, and another. In seconds, the boutique was buzzing, but not with business, with footage. Someone had recorded the confrontation, from the moment Jasmine stepped inside to the second the client walked out. The video was now spreading, already posted, already reposted. The boutique's name was in the caption. So was Francesca's. And Elena's quiet defiance, Jasmine's voice, Emily's resignation. All of it, captured, real, unfiltered. And as the boutique's air turned heavy with tension and glowing screens, one thing became clear to everyone still inside. This moment wasn't staying inside these walls. And as the screens glowed with truth and the boutique crumbled in slow silence, the three women turned toward the door. They didn't speak. They didn't rush. There was no dramatic walkout. Just quiet, deliberate movement, like a verdict being carried out. Elena placed the black silk dress back on the rack without a word. Jasmine gave Francesca one last look. No hatred, just the cold clarity of someone who expected better and was done asking. Emily followed 2 steps behind, no longer staff, no longer silent. As they walked past the other clients, no one dared make eye contact. A few pretended to check their phones. One assistant shifted nervously, holding a hanger that suddenly felt too heavy. The glass doors opened without resistance, and they stepped into the daylight. Behind them, Francesca stood still, frozen, her mouth slightly open, her hands clenched at her sides. She looked like she might speak, but nothing came. There were no apologies that could matter now, no procedures to hide behind, just silence, and the sound of her kingdom collapsing brick by invisible brick. For a woman who had ruled every inch of that boutique like a throne room, the stillness left behind by their departure was louder than anything she'd ever heard, and it wouldn't leave with them. It would stay, in every mirror, in every whisper, in every single notification, lighting up her phone. Outside, the city kept moving. Cars passed, horns sounded. People laughed somewhere down the block. But for the three women who had just stepped out of the curated cage of Le Diamant, everything felt still. Jasmine took a breath, then exhaled slowly, releasing the tension she'd carried across that marble floor like armor. Elena walked a few more paces, her expression unreadable, until they turned a corner and stopped in front of a small cafe. It wasn't glamorous. No velvet booths, no champagne service, no chandeliers, just wood tables, fresh air, and the smell of real coffee. They sat down at a table near the window, sun warming their faces. Emily hesitated, then pulled out a chair across from them. She looked lost for a moment, between pride and guilt, relief and shock. Jasmine ordered 3 coffees without asking anyone what they wanted. She knew. Elena smiled gently. It wasn't forced, it was quiet, earned. The kind of smile that came not from victory, but from surviving something ugly with grace intact. Emily wrapped her hands around her cup as if trying to keep her world from shaking. For a while, no one spoke. They didn't need to. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was necessary. Jasmine finally broke it, leaning back in her chair, eyes half lidded with exhaustion, but still burning with clarity. Status, she said, voice steady, isn't measured by labels. She glanced at Elena, then at Emily. It's measured by how you treat people when you think no one's watching? Her tone wasn't angry. Just true. Simple and sharp. Like truth should be. Emily blinked hard, then nodded once. She looked down, then looked up again. I always thought I had to choose between kindness and professionalism, she said softly. But today, I saw what happens when you stay silent too long. Elena reached over and gently touched her hand. Just a moment of connection, wordless, grounding. You didn't stay silent today, she said. You stood up. That's more than most ever do. Emily's eyes welled, but she smiled. That smile, the one that happens when shame starts to turn into strength. Jasmine stirred her coffee slowly, watching the swirls settle. Francesca will spin it, she said flatly. She'll say it was a misunderstanding, training error, isolated incident. She'll try to save the store. Elena nodded once. Let her. She sipped her drink. People like that need the story to be neat, but we don't owe them a clean ending. She looked out the window for a beat. We just owe them the truth. Across the street, life continued. A man bought flowers. A kid rode by on a scooter. Somewhere, Francesca's phone was vibrating again, probably with calls she didn't want to answer. Probably with headlines she couldn't spin fast enough. The footage had already gone viral. Jasmine's voice, Elena's silence, Emily's resignation, they were all over the timeline, and no one could unsee it. No one could unhear it. Back at the table, Emily finally exhaled, her shoulders dropping like she'd just set down a weight too heavy to name. So, what now? She asked, barely above a whisper. Jasmine looked at Elena. Elena looked at the sky, then back to Emily. Now, Elena said, you get to rebuild on your own terms. Jasmine smiled. And if you ever want to help tear down what shouldn't be standing in the first place, call us. They laughed, not loudly, not recklessly, but with that kind of laughter that breaks the final tension. The kind that says, we made it, not unscarred, but unbroken. And as they sat there, 3 women from different places, different stages, bonded by one ugly moment turned powerful. They didn't look like victims or revolutionaries or anything in between. They just looked like women who chose to remember what dignity really meant. And in that tiny cafe, without a single logo in sight, they looked more powerful than anything sold behind glass. But while Elena, Jasmine, and Emily sat quietly in the cafe, reclaiming their dignity away from the noise, the rest of the world was just beginning to hear what had happened inside Le Diamant. It started with one post, a 41-second clip filmed on shaky phone footage, capturing Jasmine Crockett's calm, devastating confrontation, and Elena standing tall in silence beside her. The caption read simply, "This is what quiet racism looks like in luxury." Within minutes, it had over 10,000 shares. By the time they finished their coffee, the video had already reached 1 million views. It hit TikTok, then Twitter, then Instagram like a digital avalanche. Reactions poured in from every corner of the internet. Some were furious, others were stunned, but all of them felt something shift. The video was dissected frame by frame. People zoomed in on Francesca's expression as Jasmine asked, "Do you even care who she is?" They posted side-by-side images of Elena's quiet composure against the boutique's marble backdrop. Influencers reposted it with captions like, "This is why I stopped shopping in places that only treat you well if you scream money." Fashion bloggers chimed in, designers, activists. The clip had become more than viral content. It had become a mirror, and it was forcing people to look at themselves. Then came the hashtag, #respect is luxury, simple, director, and suddenly everywhere. A former Vogue editor shared it with a caption about being followed inside a boutique in Paris. A black supermodel wrote, "I've walked runways in Milan and still been ignored in stores where my face hangs in the window." Actors, CEOs, stylists, hotel managers, people from every part of the industry began posting their own stories. The stories were different, but the pattern was the same. Dressed too casually, not served. Looked too ordinary, treated like a nuisance. Too quiet, too brown, too plain, therefore invisible. The movement exploded. People didn't just retweet the video, they added their own footage, old clips from other boutiques, audio recordings of staff making comments they thought would never be heard, photos of receipts alongside stories of being ignored until a card was shown, and all of it began to circle back to one name, Francesca Delacroix. At first, Le Diamant released a short statement. It was as cold and calculated as Francesca herself. "We are reviewing internal policies to ensure all guests feel welcome." The internet wasn't having it. The comments section flooded instantly. "You didn't fail to make her feel welcome. You made her feel unwelcome on purpose." Someone even created a side-by-side meme of Francesca's robotic smile next to a mannequin with the caption, "Which one's warmer?" Then came the real fire. Journalists started digging. An independent fashion reporter went back through customer reviews of Le Diamant over the last 5 years. Most were glowing, but a few, buried, filtered out, told a different story. One review from a year ago. "They wouldn't let me try on a jacket until I showed my ID and mentioned my husband was an investor." Another, "I walked in with my cousin who wasn't wearing makeup. She got side-eyed the whole time while I was treated like royalty." And then the names started surfacing. People who had been quietly silenced, subtly excluded, just like Elena. A popular podcast dropped an emergency episode titled "The Boutique Built on Judgment." Within it, a former employee of Le Diamant, speaking anonymously, revealed that Francesca trained her staff to read the room before they smile. That same staffer described an internal code, QF, short for question fit, used to describe customers who didn't look the part. The internet seized it immediately. Screenshots were shared. Commentators called it corporate profiling in couture. The story was no longer about one incident. It was about a system. News anchors ran the video in prime time. Morning shows replayed the audio of Jasmine saying, "You don't get to gatekeep dignity with a name tag and a tight smile." The line became a rallying cry. Protesters stood outside the boutique the next day, wearing shirts that read, "Dignity isn't designer." A small crowd gathered by noon. By evening, there were news trucks parked across the street. Reporters jostled for quotes. Someone printed life-size cardboard cutouts of Elena and Jasmine and placed them at the boutique entrance. No one from Le Diamant came out. The backlash spread faster than PR could control. Francesca's name began trending by itself. People scoured LinkedIn, trying to confirm her background. One fashion blogger found an old press interview where Francesca said, "Luxury should feel earned. Not everyone understands that." That line alone was enough to set the internet ablaze again. One Twitter post replied, translation, "If you don't look rich enough, we won't waste our time." By that night, dozens of celebrities had posted solidarity photos with the hashtag. Even competitors of Le Diamant began making statements, distancing themselves. Some offered public apologies for past moments of gatekeeping. But it was too late for Francesca. She hadn't just lost control of the store, she'd lost control of the narrative. The story no longer belonged to her. It belonged to Elena's silence, to Jasmine's voice, to Emily's resignation, to the millions of people who saw something familiar in a 41-second clip of quiet humiliation and public reckoning. Francesca's past, once polished and perfectly curated, was now under full audit. And the one thing she had always relied on, her ability to control how people perceived her, was gone. And through it all, Elena remained silent. She didn't post, didn't tweet. She didn't need to. Her silence had spoken clearly enough the moment she picked up the dress, the moment she stood still under that soft lighting while a system tried to erase her. Jasmine declined interviews. Emily didn't make a video. But the world didn't stop asking. Because what they had started wasn't just a conversation, it was a crack. and that crack was spreading across the glass walls of every boutique that had ever built its brand on exclusion. And Francesca? She stayed quiet too. Her name disappeared from the company site 2 days later. A change in leadership email went out to the press. A luxury trade journal reported that she had resigned for personal reasons. But the comments below the article told a different story. She didn't resign, she was revealed. And far from the noise, far from the retweets, the debates, the headlines, Elena sat in a quiet room, designing again. Her hands sketching curves, corners, textures. The kind of work that doesn't need to scream to be seen. Because now the world had finally seen her. Not because of what she wore, not because of who she knew, but because for once someone stayed still long enough to see past the surface. And listen. Respect as luxury wasn't just a trend, it was a reckoning, and it had only just begun. A week passed, the headlines quieted, the hashtags slowed, but what remained was the echo. And then one morning, Elena received an envelope. No return address, just her name, handwritten in elegant, looping cursive, the kind of writing that belonged to a different generation, one raised on stationery and apologies too late to matter. She stood in the doorway of her apartment, the morning light spilling across the tile, coffee still steaming in her hand. For a moment, she just stared at it. Then she opened it. Inside was thick cream-colored paper, monogrammed with the initials FD. The handwriting matched the envelope. Neat, careful, too careful. The kind of careful that comes from fear or guilt. Elena, I debated whether I had the right to write you this. I still don't know if I do, but I need to try. What I did, how I treated you, was wrong. There's no policy, no training manual, no boutique standard that can excuse it. The truth is uglier than that. The truth is, I saw you, and I saw myself. When I was younger, I didn't belong in places like Le Diamant. I was invisible, overlooked, dismissed, and instead of growing out of that pain, I turned it into armor. I became the kind of woman I used to fear, cold, controlled, unshakable. I thought if I could judge others faster than they judged me, I would finally be safe. I wasn't. And when you walked in, confident without performing, powerful without announcing it, I didn't see a customer. I saw a threat to everything I built my identity around. I can't take back what I did. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know. You reminded me who I used to be and who I never should have become. Francesca. Elena read it twice, not because she needed to, but because something about it felt unreal. There was no spin, no corporate tone, no plea for sympathy. It was raw and messy and human. The kind of letter you don't write unless something inside you has already started to break. She placed it gently on the table and sat down, exhaling slowly, her fingers steepled in front of her mouth. The silence in the room felt different now, not heavy, but full of weight. The kind that asked for reflection, not reaction. 10 minutes later, Jasmine walked in with 2 coffees and the morning paper under her arm. Still viral, she muttered, tossing the paper on the counter. Apparently they're calling you the Queen of Quiet Resistance. She grinned, then looked up and caught the expression on Elena's face. The grin faded. What happened? Elena slid the letter across the table without saying a word. Jasmine picked it up, read it slowly, all the way through. Her eyes didn't narrow, her lips didn't curl. She read it like a lawyer reads a testimony, listening for the cracks beneath the words. When she finished, she laid it down beside her untouched coffee and leaned back in the chair. For a long beat, they said nothing. Then Jasmine asked, voice low, calm but direct, "Are you going to forgive her?" Elena looked out the window. The city was alive as ever. Cars rushing, people moving, the world forgetting. But she hadn't. Not yet. Not entirely. Her fingers traced the edge of her coffee cup before she answered. "Forgiveness doesn't change the past," she said, voice steady. "But it opens the door to the future." Jasmine didn't blink. "And you're ready to open that door?" "I'm not opening it for her," Elena said. "I'm opening it for me." The words didn't come from pride or pity. They came from something deeper, something harder earned. The understanding that dignity was not just what others gave you, but what you refuse to let them take. Jasmine nodded slowly. You're better than me, she said, but there was no bitterness in it, just respect. No, Elena replied. I'm just done carrying her mistake on my shoulders. Outside, a delivery van honked at a cyclist. Somewhere down the street, music played from an open cafe door. Life didn't pause for moral victories. It didn't hand out medals. But in that small kitchen, over 2 cups of cooling coffee and a single folded letter, something settled between them. Not closure, but clarity. Elena stood and walked to the window. The boutique was still open, rebranded, repainted, now with a new name and a new manager. But the truth lived online forever. And more importantly, it had lived in the people who watched, who recognized themselves in her silence, in Jasmine's fire, in Emily's quiet rebellion. Elena turned back to the table, picked up the letter one last time, and folded it neatly. She didn't throw it away. She didn't frame it. She just placed it in a drawer and closed it, like a chapter that no longer needed reading. Jasmine lifted her coffee and raised it slightly. To the next room, she said. Elena smiled. To the next room, she echoed. And this time, they were walking in together. No labels, no armor, no need for permission, just presence and power and peace. Some stories end in silence, but not this one. This one stepped back into the light on its own terms. 3 months later, on a sunlit corner in downtown Los Angeles, a new name appeared on glass. More. No tagline. No gold accents. Just clean lines, warm light, and one message etched into the front door in small serif letters. Everyone belongs. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no step-and-repeat wall, no fashion show dressed in pretense. Elena didn't need spectacle. What she had built was the opposite of Le Diamant in every way. Her new showroom was not guarded by velvet ropes or security disguised as stylists. There were no dress codes, no forced whispers, no rules that whispered, "You should be grateful we let you in." Instead, there was music, soft, live piano on weekends. There was fresh coffee at the front. There was space to move, breathe, ask, exist. And the people came. Not just designers, architects, or industry elites. People came in jeans. People came in scrubs and uniforms and vintage jackets and canvas shoes. They came alone, with friends, with families. And no one looked at their shoes before saying hello. Because in this place, dignity was not earned through appearance. It was already yours when you walked in. At the heart of it all stood Emily, now the director of operations. No longer an intern, no longer a shadow. She walked the floor with a tablet in one hand, greeting guests by name, listening, adjusting, always alert, but never judging. She had helped write the training manual herself. First line, kindness is not a brand value, it's a requirement. Her old name tag from Le Diamant sat in a frame above her desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of how close she'd come to becoming someone she wasn't, of the day she said no, of the day she said enough. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled across polished concrete floors and a group of teenage design students explored the space in awe, Emily stood by the front desk and smiled. She watched a young woman in a hoodie ask questions about textile sourcing, and a man in steel-toe boots sketching something in a notebook beside a display table. This room, this energy, was the world she had once only imagined. Now she was running it. And Elena? She was everywhere. She didn't walk the floor like a queen. She moved through the showroom like part of the design itself. A gentle presence, quiet, observant. She didn't need to speak loudly anymore. Her work had learned how to speak for itself. When clients came in expecting exclusivity, she greeted them with openness. And when they left surprised by how they felt, not judged but seen, she considered that a success greater than any luxury headline could offer. She didn't hang press articles on the walls. There were many praising her redefinition of luxury, her bold rejection of status-based service, her architectural innovations, but she kept them stored in a drawer. This space wasn't for her past. It was for what came next. And at the center of that future stood one woman who had never stopped fighting for others. Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine didn't stay in the boutique story. She carried its spark into something larger, something lasting. She now served as legal advisor to the Morena Project, a nonprofit initiative named in honor of Jasmine's grandmother, a hotel maid who'd once been fired for looking tired in front of guests. The project focused on training, empowering, and legally protecting women in the service industry who had experienced discrimination based on race, appearance, or class. It offered free legal clinics, press support, and advocacy training. Jasmine led the first workshop herself, standing in front of a group of women in a borrowed community center with rolled-up sleeves and fire in her voice. There are places that will try to shrink you, she told them. Places that will try to make you invisible unless you look like what they expect. And when that happens, you don't ask for a seat, you build the damn table. Word spread, articles followed, donations poured in. Even former critics stepped forward, acknowledging something had changed. Jasmine didn't just help Elena. She had sparked a legal and cultural movement that was forcing businesses, brands, and boardrooms to look hard at the way they equated luxury with exclusion. And she wasn't slowing down. Back at the showroom, Elena met with Jasmine weekly. Sometimes it was to consult on community partnerships. Sometimes it was just for coffee and reflection. One Thursday afternoon, as the sky turned gold outside the showroom's wide windows, the two women sat in the upper loft office overlooking the space below. Jasmine leaned on the railing, watching a mother and daughter walk hand in hand through the display area. "You realize what you did, right?" she said quietly. "You didn't just build a showroom, you built a reset button." Elena smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone." Jasmine turned, her gaze warm but sharp. "No, you didn't, but you were the first one through the door." Elena looked down at the open floor below. No pedestals, no velvet ropes, just people, ideas, curiosity, and space to be human. "The world told me I needed to dress a certain way to be respected," Elena said, her voice almost a whisper. "Turns out I just needed to stop asking for permission." The door below opened. A young man in a delivery uniform stepped in, nervously holding a worn-out notebook. Emily met him at the front with a smile, not asking why he was there, but how she could help. Jasmine watched it all happen, arms folded. "You know," she said, "if someone had told me that a moment of humiliation in a boutique would lead to all this, I wouldn't have believed them." Elena didn't look away from the floor. "It didn't lead to it," she said. "It revealed it. We didn't create something new. We just made space for what should have always been there." Outside, traffic passed. People walked by without knowing they were steps away from a revolution disguised as a showroom. But inside, change wasn't being declared. It was being lived, quietly, boldly. Every hour the doors stayed open. Every time someone felt safe to ask. Every time someone walked out feeling worthy, not because of what they wore, but because they were treated like they mattered. That was the new definition of luxury. And Elena, Jasmine, and Emily had written it together. Not in gold foil, but in courage. As the sun dipped below the skyline and the lights inside Moore dimmed to their evening glow, something settled in the air. Not quiet, not stillness, but permanence. The kind of energy that lingers long after the doors close. Downstairs, the last client of the day stepped out. A woman in paint-splattered overalls holding a color swatch like a treasure. She hadn't been rushed. She hadn't been judged. She had been welcomed. Emily locked the front door behind her, then stood for a moment with her palm against the cool glass. She didn't look tired. She looked full, of purpose, of pride, of something she once thought belonged only to people who wore name tags with other people's logos. Upstairs, Elena stood alone in her studio. The city lights stretched out beyond the window, flickering like pixels on a broken screen. She held a pencil in one hand and a sketch pad in the other. But for once, she wasn't drawing. She was remembering. That day, that store, that voice wrapped in silk telling her what she couldn't wear. That slow, bitter taste of being erased in real time. But instead of letting it harden her, she had done the unthinkable. She had built something better. Not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been told they weren't enough just by walking through a door. The memory still stung, but it no longer controlled her. That was the difference. That was the victory no headline could print. Across town, Jasmine Crockett stood before a packed auditorium of young law students. Her blazer hung over her shoulder. She didn't pace. She didn't posture. She stood still. Her voice alone did the moving. She told them the story not as gossip, not as spectacle, but as evidence of what happens when a system forgets its humanity, of how law isn't written only in codes and clauses, but in moments, in choices, in what you allow to happen in front of you without speaking. And the woman they ignored, Jasmine said, her voice slow and full of fire, is the same woman who now signs the front of a business card the industry once refused to hand her. The auditorium fell silent. No applause. Just the deep, stunned stillness of people learning where real power begins. Later that night, the streets emptied. The city exhaled. Somewhere, a new showroom opened. Somewhere else, an old one quietly closed. Francesca was gone from the headlines now, but not forgotten. Not by those she hurt, not by those who watched, not by those who finally had the words to name what they had felt for years. Disrespect, disguised as elegance. Prejudice, disguised as preference. But that wasn't the story that remained. It wasn't the pain that lasted. It was what came after. A woman once judged for her sneakers now consulted luxury brands on customer experience. A young intern once told to stay professional now trained teams on emotional intelligence. And a lawyer once called too loud in courtrooms now rewrote policies for national hospitality chains. They didn't break the system. They just stopped letting it break them. And in that quiet, steady defiance, something new was born. Not loud, not gold-plated, not reserved for the chosen few, just real. So maybe that's where the story ends. Not in fire, not in fury, but in presence. In the way someone now walks into a room and feels no need to prove they belong. In the way a receptionist greets a janitor the same way they greet a CEO. In the way a young girl sees someone who looks like her own mother owning the space instead of cleaning it. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply make room for everyone. And in the end, one truth remains. Real luxury doesn't need to impress. It only needs to leave something behind. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.